At 2 a.m., a relentless pounding on a peeling front door shattered the quiet of a Seattle rainstorm. Thomas expected a drunk neighbor or the police. Instead, he found a soaking wet billionaire CEO standing on his porch. Her first words weren't a greeting. They were a billion-dollar threat. The digital clock on the microwave flickered to 1:58 a.m. Thomas Hayes rubbed his tired eyes, the harsh blue light of his dual monitors burning into his retinas. He was a 34-year-old freelance architectural draftsman, though freelance was just a polite word for taking whatever grueling, underpaid contracts he could find to keep the lights on in his rented bungalow on Northwest 65th Street in Ballard, Seattle. Upstairs, his 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, was fast asleep, clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. It had been just the two of them for 3 years. His wife, Sarah, had died of an undiagnosed heart aneurysm on a random Tuesday. 1 minute she was laughing in the kitchen, the next she was gone, leaving Thomas with a mountain of medical debt, a shattered heart, and a little girl who had her mother's piercing green eyes. The storm outside was violent, lashing rain against the single-pane windows. Thomas reached for his cold, bitter coffee when the headlights of a heavy vehicle swept across his living room wall. It wasn't a passing car. It stopped. He heard the heavy, muffled thud of a luxury car door closing, followed by the rapid clicking of heels on wet concrete. Then came the knock. It wasn't a hesitant tap. It was a sharp, authoritative pounding that demanded immediate attention. Thomas froze. Debt collectors didn't show up at 2 a.m. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight he kept near the door, his heart hammering against his ribs, and peered through the peephole. Standing under his flickering porch light was a woman who entirely defied her surroundings. She was flanked by a man who looked like private security, broad-shouldered and stoic, holding a massive black umbrella over her. But the woman herself commanded all the attention. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat that easily cost more than Thomas's car, and her sharp, angular face was set in an expression of absolute, terrifying resolve. Thomas cautiously unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door an inch, keeping the chain engaged. "Who are you? It's 2 a.m. "Thomas Hayes," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, but laced with an icy urgency. "My name is Victoria Croft. I am the CEO of Croft Enterprises. Unchain the door. We need to talk about your late wife, and we need to do it right now." Thomas felt the breath leave his lungs. Croft Enterprises. Even in his exhausted state, the name registered. They were a multinational conglomerate based in downtown Seattle, dealing in everything from commercial real estate to high-level tech infrastructure. Victoria Croft was a fixture in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, a ruthless, self-made billionaire known for crushing her competition. But why the hell was she talking about Sarah? "I don't know anyone named Croft," Thomas said, his grip tightening on the flashlight. "And my wife has been dead for 3 years. You have the wrong house. Leave or I'm calling the cops." "Call them," Victoria countered, without missing a beat, stepping closer to the crack in the door. "By the time they arrive, the morning news will have leaked the story that Sarah Hayes was born Samantha Croft, my younger sister, and that your 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, is the sole heir to a 51% controlling stake in a $20 billion empire." The metal flashlight nearly slipped from Thomas's hand. He stared into Victoria's eyes. They were the exact same shade of piercing green as Sarah's, as Chloe's. "Let me in, Thomas," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Because if you don't, in 6 hours, a man named Dominic Sterling is going to take everything from me, and then he is going to come for your daughter." Numb with shock, Thomas slid the chain off the door. Victoria stepped into the cramped, mildly messy living room. She took off her damp coat, handing it to her security guard, who remained silently on the porch, closing the door behind her. She stood in the center of the room, her designer suit a stark contrast to the faded thrift store rug and the scattered crayons on the coffee table. She didn't look around with disgust. She looked around with the clinical calculation of a predator assessing a trap. "Sit down," Victoria commanded, walking over to his worn-out armchair. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I brought the legal documentation to prove every single word of it." Thomas didn't sit. He stood defensively between Victoria and the staircase leading up to Chloe's room. "Start talking. Now, who was my wife?" Victoria opened a sleek leather briefcase she had carried in, pulling out a thick manila folder and dropping it onto the coffee table. "My father, Richard Croft, was a brilliant man but a tyrannical monster. He built Croft Enterprises from the ground up. He controlled everything, the board, the company, and his family. I played his game. I sacrificed my life, my youth, and my own marriage to build the company alongside him. Samantha, your Sarah, refused." Victoria paused, a fleeting look of something resembling grief crossing her iron-clad features. 10 years ago, she couldn't take his abuse anymore. She walked out, changed her name, dropped off the grid, and completely vanished. My father spent millions trying to find her. He never did. Until 6 months ago, when he was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. Thomas felt a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. The Sarah he knew was a preschool teacher. She loved baking bread, listening to indie folk music, and shopping at farmers' markets. She had always told him she was an only child, raised in foster care, with no living family. It was the foundation of their bond. Thomas had lost his own parents young, and they had clung to each other, building their own little family. "My father died last week," Victoria continued, her tone hardening. "When the will was read on Friday, I expected to finally take formal control of the company I built. Instead, the old bastard delivered his final insult from the grave. He left his entire 51% founder's share to Samantha's firstborn child, placed in a blind trust to be managed by the child's surviving guardian until she turns 18. "Me," Thomas whispered, the reality crashing down on him. "You," Victoria confirmed. "Which brings me to why I am standing in a house that smells like cheap coffee and damp drywall at 2 in the morning. My ex-husband, Dominic Sterling, is a snake. He sits on the board of directors. He found out about the will before I did. He hired private investigators, tracked down Sarah's death certificate, and found you and Chloe." Victoria stepped closer to Thomas, the scent of expensive rain-washed perfume filling his senses. "At 8 a.m. today, there is an emergency board meeting. Dominic is orchestrating a hostile takeover. He is going to present a motion to have me ousted as CEO. Because the 51% share is currently in legal limbo, I don't have the voting power to stop him." "And what does that have to do with Chloe?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling with a terrifying, protective anger. "Dominic isn't just trying to fire me," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. "His lawyers have already drafted an emergency petition for temporary guardianship of Chloe. They are going to claim that you are an unfit father. They will bury you in litigation, bankrupt you, and use your meager income and long working hours as proof of neglect. Dominic will seize control of the trust, take the company, and your daughter will be raised by a corporate sociopath who only sees her as a proxy vote." Thomas felt the room spin. "He can't do that! I'm her father. He has bottomless pockets and the best lawyers in the country. He can do whatever he wants," Victoria snapped, "unless we stop him first." She pulled a single sheet of heavy bond paper from the folder and laid a gold fountain pen next to it. "This is an irrevocable proxy agreement," Victoria said. "It grants me the executive voting rights of Chloe's shares until she is 18. If you sign this right now, I walk into that boardroom at 8 a.m. I crush Dominic's coup, and I bury him so deep he will never see the light of day. In exchange, I will establish a private, untouchable account for you and Chloe with $10 million by noon. You never have to worry about money again, and no one will ever touch your daughter." Thomas stared at the paper. $10 million. Safety for Chloe. It sounded like a lifeline thrown into a raging ocean. But as he looked at Victoria Croft, he saw the exact same ruthless ambition she had just accused her ex-husband of harboring. He thought about Sarah. He thought about why she had run away from this world, why she had hidden so desperately from her family, and why she had never told him the truth. She was terrified of them. "No," Thomas said quietly. Victoria blinked, clearly unaccustomed to the word. "Excuse me?" "Sarah ran away from your father." "She ran away from you," Thomas said, his voice gaining strength. "She chose to live in a small house, on a tight budget, rather than be a part of Croft Enterprises. If she wanted Chloe to have anything to do with your world, she would have told me. I'm not signing over my daughter's legacy to you just because you knocked on my door and told me a scary story." Victoria's mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine panic. "Thomas, you are not listening to me. Dominic will ruin you. You don't know how these people operate." "But Sarah did," Thomas replied. A memory suddenly struck him like a physical blow. A week before Sarah died, she had been acting strangely. She had handed him a small, sealed envelope. "Tommy," she had said, her voice unusually serious. "If anyone from Seattle ever comes looking for me, if anyone ever knocks on our door asking about my past, you take this key. You open the lockbox in the attic. Promise me." He had promised, brushed it off as a morbid, anxious whim, and completely forgotten about it in the blinding haze of grief that followed her sudden death. Thomas backed away from the coffee table. "I need you to wait right here," he said to Victoria. "We don't have time for games, Thomas," Victoria hissed, looking at her diamond-encrusted watch. "It's 2:30 a.m. Wait." "Here," Thomas ordered, his tone matching hers in authority. He turned and bolted up the stairs, quietly passing Chloe's room. He pulled the cord for the attic stairs, the wooden steps creaking in the quiet house. He climbed up into the dusty, insulation-scented darkness, switching on the bare bulb overhead. In the far corner, buried under old winter coats and a broken toaster, was a heavy steel lockbox. Thomas pulled the small brass key from his keychain, the key he had kept simply because it belonged to Sarah, never knowing what it opened. His hands shook as he inserted it into the lock. It clicked. He opened the lid. Inside lay a bound leather journal, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter addressed to him. He opened the letter, recognizing Sarah's elegant handwriting immediately. "My dearest Tommy, if you are reading this, it means my father is dead, and the vultures have finally found you. I am so sorry I lied to you. I did it to protect you and our beautiful Chloe. By now, my sister Victoria has likely found you. Do not trust her. Do not trust Dominic. They will tear each other apart for control of the company, and they will use Chloe as the weapon. But they don't know the truth. Before I left, I stole something from Croft Enterprises, something my father and Victoria built their entire empire upon. The USB drive in this box contains the original source code and the true patents. They don't own the company, Tommy. I do. And now you do. Don't sign anything. Destroy them." Thomas stared at the letter, his blood turning to ice. He looked at the USB drive, suddenly realizing that the billionaire CEO waiting downstairs had no idea she had just walked into a trap set by her dead sister a decade ago. He closed the box, tucked the letter and the drive into his pocket, and descended the stairs to face Victoria Croft. The game had just changed. Thomas descended the creaky wooden stairs of the Ballard bungalow, his hand buried deep in the pocket of his worn flannel pants. His fingers traced the cold, hard edges of the small USB drive and the worn leather binding of Sarah's journal. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, yet a strange, terrifying clarity had washed over him. 10 minutes ago, he had been a grieving, exhausted single father entirely at the mercy of a corporate titan. Now, he was the sole custodian of a secret that could dismantle her entire world. In the cramped living room below, Victoria Croft was pacing like a caged leopard. The storm outside continued to batter the single-pane windows, the wind howling in a low, continuous drone. But the atmosphere inside was even more suffocating. Victoria had discarded her polite, icy veneer. She was checking her diamond-encrusted watch every few seconds, a high-stakes predator trapped in a distinctly middle-class cage. When she heard the floorboards groan under Thomas's weight, she stopped abruptly. She immediately extended a perfectly manicured hand, expecting the signed proxy agreement. "I didn't sign it," Thomas said. His voice was alarmingly steady, surprising even himself. The bone-deep exhaustion that had blurred his vision just an hour ago had completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, crystalline focus of a father protecting his only child. Victoria's perfectly sculpted face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "Thomas, you are making a catastrophic mistake. Do you think you're being noble? Do you honestly believe you're honoring my sister by playing the proud, independent widower?" She closed the distance between them, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous hiss. "Dominic's lawyers are sharks, and they are circling right now. They will take Chloe from you before you even have time to hire a public defender. I am the only shield you have." "You're not a shield, Victoria. You're just another sword," Thomas replied, his gaze locked with hers. He didn't back away. Instead, he walked right past her, brushing her shoulder as he moved into the small, dimly lit kitchen. He picked up the glass carafe from his ancient drip coffee maker and poured himself a fresh, bitter cup. It was a deliberate, agonizingly mundane action, designed entirely to show her that she no longer controlled the pacing of this room. "Sarah didn't just run from your father," Thomas said, taking a slow sip from his chipped mug. He turned to face her, leaning casually against the laminate countertop. "She ran from you too, and she knew that one day, one of you would eventually come knocking. So, she left me a contingency plan." He pulled his hand from his pocket and set the small, sleek USB drive onto the counter with a soft clack. It looked completely ordinary, a cheap plastic storage device you could buy at any corner store. But the way Victoria's sharp green eyes instantly darted to it betrayed a sudden, involuntary micro-expression of uncertainty. For the first time since she had kicked her way into his life, she looked unsure of her footing. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its polished authority. "Before your sister became a preschool teacher who loved baking sourdough and tending to a backyard vegetable garden, she was Samantha Croft," Thomas began, methodically reciting the explosive information he had just speed-read in the attic. Specifically, she was the lead systems architect for a little initiative called Project Archangel. Victoria physically recoiled, the color draining from her cheeks so fast it left her looking almost bruised in the harsh kitchen light. "That's right," Thomas noted, catching her reaction. The foundational code that Croft Enterprises uses to manage global logistics grids for the U.S. Department of Defense, the shipping manifests for half the Pacific Rim, and the high-frequency trading platforms on Wall Street. Your father took the credit for it. He patented it under the corporation's umbrella. He built your $20 billion empire on it, but he didn't write a single line of it. Sarah did. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered, shaking her head. Her denial was rapid, but it lacked conviction. "My father had the best engineers in the world. Samantha was brilliant, yes, but she was a junior analyst. She was a prodigy, and your father was a parasite," Thomas interrupted, his voice turning to ice. "This drive contains the original, time-stamped source code. It contains her cryptographic signatures embedded deep in the framework. It has the drafted, unfiled patents from 8 months before your father ever claimed them as his own." Thomas took a step forward, leaving the coffee mug behind. "But more importantly, Victoria, it contains an unexecuted, dormant dead man's switch. A back door she built into the architecture that your father's best engineers in the world never found. If I plug this drive into a connected terminal and hit enter, the entire Archangel framework goes completely open source. Every proprietary protocol Croft Enterprises owns becomes public domain. Your competitive advantage drops to absolute zero before the New York Stock Exchange even rings the opening bell." The silence that followed was absolute. The storm outside seemed to fade into white noise. The power dynamic in the room had violently, irreversibly shifted. The billionaire CEO was suddenly at the absolute mercy of a freelance draftsman wearing a thrift store flannel shirt. "You wouldn't," Victoria breathed, her eyes fixed on the tiny piece of plastic. "It would utterly destroy the company. It would wipe out thousands of jobs. It would destroy Chloe's entire inheritance." "I don't give a damn about the inheritance," Thomas roared, slamming his open palm against the counter. The violent sound made Victoria jump. "I care about my daughter. If tearing your empire down to the bedrock is what it takes to keep Dominic and his corporate vultures away from her, I will burn it to the ground right now and sleep soundly tonight." Victoria stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. He wasn't a weak, easily manipulated pawn to be pushed around the chessboard. He was Sarah's husband. He had the same quiet, unyielding steel that her sister had possessed. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcibly reassembling her shattered composure. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted completely from a dictator to a negotiator. "So," Victoria asked, her voice tight but measured, "what is your play?" Thomas looked up at the digital clock on the microwave. "It's 3:30 a.m. I'm going to call my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She's a retired pediatric nurse and a fiercely light sleeper. I'll pay her whatever she asks to come sit on my couch. Your heavy outside is going to stand on my front porch, and you are going to call another one of your Black Ops security guards to watch my back door." He stepped closer to Victoria, refusing to blink. "Chloe does not wake up. Chloe does not leave this house under any circumstances." "And you?" Victoria asked, swallowing hard. "I am going to put on a suit," Thomas said, pocketing the drive once more. "I am getting into the back of your car, and I am going with you to the Columbia Center. When Dominic makes his move to take my daughter at 8 a.m., I am going to introduce myself to the board." The dawn broke over Seattle in a bruised palette of purple and grey, the rain finally slowing to a heavy drizzle. Thomas sat in the back of Victoria's Maybach, watching the sleek, jagged silhouette of the downtown skyline approach. He felt out of place in his dark grey suit, the only one he owned, worn last at Sarah's funeral, but he refused to let the intimidation show. They entered the Croft Enterprises headquarters through a private, subterranean garage. The silence of the elevator ride up to the 71st floor was suffocating. When the brushed steel doors slid open, they stepped onto a floor of glass, imported Italian marble, and panoramic views of the Puget Sound. The boardroom was already buzzing with quiet, tense energy. 10 men and women in immaculate tailoring sat around a massive table carved from a single slab of black walnut. At the far end sat Dominic Sterling. He was younger than Thomas expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with aggressively styled hair and the smug, relaxed posture of a man who knew he held the winning hand. Beside him sat a silver-haired man Thomas recognized from local business magazines, Jonathan Caldwell, a notoriously ruthless litigator. When Victoria entered, the room fell dead silent. Dominic smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "Victoria," Dominic said smoothly, "I wasn't sure you'd show. I see you brought a guest. Is he lost? The mailroom is on the 2nd floor." A few board members chuckled nervously. Victoria ignored them, walking to her seat at the head of the table. She didn't sit. Thomas stood right behind her right shoulder, scanning the room like an architect evaluating a load-bearing wall. "Let's skip the theatrics, Dominic," Victoria said. "Call your motion." Dominic leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "Very well. In light of Richard Croft's passing, and the shocking revelation that his 51% controlling shares are locked in an intestate trust belonging to a 6-year-old child, this board requires immediate, stable leadership. Victoria, your emotional volatility and mismanagement of the Asian markets are liabilities. I am calling for a vote of no confidence to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." "And the shares?" Victoria asked coldly. Jonathan Caldwell, the lawyer, spoke up. "My firm filed an emergency injunction at 6 a.m. We are challenging the fitness of the child's guardian, Thomas Hayes. Child Protective Services and a family court judge have been notified of his dire financial situation, his erratic working hours, and his history of depression following his wife's death. Temporary guardianship, and therefore proxy control of the shares, will be transferred to Mr. Sterling, a respected member of this board, until the matter is resolved." Thomas felt a hot surge of adrenaline, but he forced his heart rate down. They were trying to paint him as broken. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Thomas stepped around Victoria, moving to the center of the room. He walked directly to the boardroom's presentation console and plugged the encrypted USB drive into the port. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Dominic snapped, standing up. "Security." "Sit down, Dominic," Thomas commanded. The sheer force and absolute authority in his voice echoed off the glass walls, freezing the 2 security guards who had started to enter the room. Thomas typed in a password. Sarah's birthday, combined with Chloe's, and the massive wall-to-wall screen behind him flickered to life. Lines of complex code, patent diagrams, and digitally notarized signatures filled the screen. "My name is Thomas Hayes," he said, turning to face the billionaires and lawyers. "I am Sarah Hayes's husband and Chloe Hayes's father, and you are all currently sitting in a building funded by stolen property." The board members murmured in confusion. Jonathan Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Hayes, this is a private corporate meeting. Whatever amateur hour—" "Look at the screen, Counselor," Thomas cut in. "That is the foundational source code for Project Archangel. The date of the cryptographic signature is 8 months before Richard Croft filed the patent. The signature belongs to Samantha Croft, my wife. She was the sole author and creator of your company's core infrastructure." Dominic sneered, though a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. "You're bluffing. That's forged." "Test it," Thomas offered, tossing a secondary flash drive onto the table. "Hand that to your chief technology officer. It contains the decryption keys for the core servers, keys only the original architect would have. If I press execute on this console, the Archangel framework is released under a public, open-source license. Every military contract, every financial grid you manage, becomes public domain in 30 seconds. Croft Enterprises will face a localized extinction event before the stock market opens. The room erupted into chaos. Board members began shouting. Caldwell grabbed the flash drive, his face pale, recognizing the immediate legal and financial catastrophe Thomas was holding over their heads. Dominic's smug facade shattered completely. "You're insane! You would destroy your own daughter's inheritance." "My daughter's inheritance is her mother's brilliant mind and her father's protection," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I don't give a damn about your stock prices. Here are my terms." The room fell instantly silent again. "First," Thomas said, looking directly at Dominic, "you withdraw your motion. You resign from this board, effective immediately. Furthermore, you will sign a legally binding agreement relinquishing any and all claims, future or present, regarding Chloe Hayes. If I ever see your face in Ballard, if I ever catch a private investigator within 50 miles of my daughter, I will press enter." Dominic opened his mouth to argue, but Caldwell put a firm hand on his arm, shaking his head. The lawyer knew they were beaten. "Second," Thomas turned to Victoria, "you remain CEO, but the 51% share stays in Chloe's trust, managed entirely by me. I am appointing an independent oversight committee to audit this company's practices, funded by Croft Enterprises. You will run the day-to-day, Victoria, but you work for Chloe now, and by extension, you work for me. Do we have an agreement?" Victoria looked at the screen, then at Dominic's defeated posture, and finally at Thomas. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, a rare expression of profound respect. "We have an agreement, Mr. Hayes," Victoria said. Thomas ejected the drive, the screen going black. He walked toward the door, pausing just behind Dominic's chair. "Don't forget to validate my parking on your way out, Dominic." 2 years later, the Seattle rain felt different against the windows of their new Mercer Island home. Thomas watched Chloe run across the lawn, her green eyes bright with unbroken innocence. He had dismantled a billionaire's toxic legacy and built an empire of safety in its place. Sarah's secret had finally set them free. The drafting board in his office remained, but Thomas was no longer just drawing dreams. He was protecting one.